So, with the release of Dune Part 2, it's finally time for me to go back and rank out the filmography of Denis Villeneuve. Arguably the best filmmaker working today. At least I think most people can agree. A top 5 filmmaker that we have today. Denis, of course, is a Canadian filmmaker. He's been working for about 20, a little over, closer to 30 years in the industry. He's made over 10 films, I think. I have 11 films here to rank. Many of which are big, gigantic, epic sci-fi movies, and some of which are very kind of small, sort of art house type movies. He's a very interesting filmmaker that has made so many different kinds of films when it comes to genres, but he's also a filmmaker that's defined by his incredibly distinct visual style. His films are epic in scale. Even the movies that are about smaller stories, the visual and cinematography styles are very epic and grand. Big, wide shots, amazing, beautiful, stunning cinematography, visuals and ideas, both in visual effects and in practical effects, that are just so hard to comprehend how he even came up with some of the stuff. He's a really, really incredibly distinctive filmmaker, somebody that's just so different from anybody else working today, and it also helps, he's a pretty damn good writer, because a lot of his films are brilliant when it comes to plot. Now, Denis is one of my personal favorite filmmakers, and a few of these films on this list are some of my favorite movies ever. I truly kind of like and love just about every film that I've ranked here. There's a couple that I think, a little bit lesser of than some of the other ones, but the top of this list is unbelievable. So you know what? We're going to jump right into it. I'm going to rank them out. Just remember, this is my opinion, so if you disagree with me, that's okay. Let me know down below what you think is wrong, what your opinion is, and we can have a conversation. But these are my favorite Denis movies. This is me ranking all of his filmography. Now, I don't have much to say about August 32nd on Earth. I've only seen it once, and I watched it about 8 years ago, and I don't remember much from it. It's Denis' first major film that he's at least credited for on IMDb, and it's a film that's very small, it's very independent, and it tells a very basic story about a woman who's been in a car crash, and there's a bunch of interesting stuff that goes on. I think a lot of the themes are about appreciating life. I don't remember much about it, so I'm not going to keep talking about it, and maybe a proper YouTuber would have went back and rewatched the movie, but you all, there's like 9 movies that you guys really want me to talk about, so we'll get to those in a second. But yeah, I would have to say his worst movie is probably his first movie, August 32nd. Much like August 32nd, Maelstrom is a movie that I've only seen once, and I saw it a while ago. This is a movie that I definitely remember liking a little bit more because it's a little bit more complex when it comes to the thematical essence of the plot. It's definitely got more of a distinct visual style. You start seeing Denis really getting into what he is as a filmmaker, which is a visual filmmaker that also sometimes writes incredible stories. This is a movie about a woman who ends up hitting a guy with her car, and there's like a lot with drug abuse and the repercussions of all of that, and there's a lot of weird stuff that I didn't truly understand in my watch through. Also haven't watched this one in a while. Yet again, a good YouTuber probably would have went back and watched it, but I am not a good YouTuber, unfortunately. I don't think so. I'm sorry about that. But either way, Maelstrom number 10. Let's go on. Here's a movie that I did watch recently. Polytechnic I watched just about a month ago for like the second or the third time. I watched it for the first time years and years and years ago. It's a very hard movie to rank and a very hard movie to talk about. It's a movie that is extremely well made for the level that it's made at. It's clearly a very, very small movie that's telling a very direct and sort of like targeted story. It's not a very complex story. It's telling the real life story about this mass shooting that happened in Canada. This terrible, terrible mass shooting that in today's day and age feels like something that our society kind of sees too much. Obviously, this is something that's very relevant in our world and our society. The timing of this movie, I'm not sure that it was. I think it was more of trying to expose the issue. Versus nowadays, we understand this is a very, very broad issue that happens all the time. So that made this movie kind of hard to watch, because it kind of made it, for me at least, feel like I was peering inside some sort of event like this, which is obviously the point, but it felt like something I've seen too much of in a weird way. And therefore, it's not a movie that I think I'd go back and rewatch. But it's definitely a film that's extremely well made. It's extremely hard-hitting. It's depressing. But it's also eye-opening. And I think it's very well made. And I think Denis did a really good job earlier in his career taking a movie like this and a subject matter like this and doing it in a way that's both respectful but also kind of direct to the audience in exposing them to the ideas and the message that he wanted to get across. So Polytechnic is a movie that I definitely recommend if you're watching his whole filmography. But it's probably not a movie that I'm ever going to watch again. Now, I watched this movie on a plane ride about a year ago. Plane ride home. Very strange plane movie. But I just want to say, I went into this movie knowing that there was some crazy, crazy twist at the end of this film that was just so incredible, and it's one of the greatest twists ever, is what I've been told. And yeah, it's quite the twist, and trying to act normal on that plane ride. You know what I'm talking about. Now, I don't want to spoil it just in case anybody's watched the movie, but it truthfully is one of the most shocking and bizarre twists in Hollywood history. This movie's not bizarre and funny like I'm making it sound like just by me laughing, but it is such a weird, out there twist. And this movie, in itself, is really dark and kind of exhausting in the sense that there's so much bad stuff happening on screen, but also discovery on screen. This is a movie that feels probably the least like Denis Villeneuve of all of his filmography. This is the one movie that if you had told me it was made by somebody completely different, it wouldn't have surprised me, because it just doesn't really feel like a Denis movie. It feels like more of a character study about these siblings and their mother as they're on this quest to find their father, and it's kind of going over the history of what their mother had gone through, wars in this land, how war not just pulls apart cultures, but cities and people, and how those war-torn cultures can kind of make people sort of like animals and kind of evil in a way in the decisions that we make in those situations. It's a really dark movie. It's a really violent movie that does not pull its punches. And it's a movie that, yet again, kind of like the previous one, I don't know if I'd ever watch it again, because now knowing the twist, I'm not sure the movie will have that same weight to it on the second watch through, but it's definitely a really great movie. It's the first movie on this list, I will say, is great, and I recommend it. Incendies is a fantastic film. Just think it's probably the worst of the best. This is also a really weird film to rank. Enemy is also a very, very different film from Denis. In a different way, though. It's definitely got the visual flair that Denis brings to his films. This is a movie visually unlike anything you will ever see. The movie obviously is filmed kind of very small, although it does have some big shots that I won't spoil later in the film. The film has this weird kind of yellow coloring and color grade to the whole vibe of it. The whole film sort of feels empty and kind of bleak in a sense, but at the same time, it's chaotic, and that's sort of the theme of the movie. It's chaos, which creates order, and the movie is very, very smart. It's a very basic movie, which tells a story about Jake Gyllenhaal, who plays this teacher, and he finds out that there's this actor that looks just like him and sounds just like him, and then they meet, and Jake Gyllenhaal does double duty playing these two characters, and the whole point of the movie is trying to figure out why they look the same, why they're like twins of each other, and what the hell is going on. It's kind of the basic rundown of the plot. And although the film doesn't really delve too much into the sci-fi aspects, it more stays the course of a psychological study. I definitely think the themes and the messaging that Denis was going for in this film, the ideas in the script, the subtextual matter, is probably the most well thought out and well developed of his entire filmography. When you actually understand what the movie is trying to say and what it's about, the whole thing becomes 10 times better. You immediately get a sense of, wow, this film is incredibly smart, both with its story, but how it binds the visual aspects of the story. The stuff with the spiders in this movie, which I won't spoil, and the imagery of webs, and how it all kind of connects to that one central theme that you also get in the opening text of the film. It's all really brilliant, and it makes me really have a sense of respect for this film. This film also has an incredible score. The score kind of reminds me of Joker, 2019's Joker movie. It's kind of an off-putting violin type score, and it's really beautiful, but also unsettling, and it works extremely well for this film and for this story. It's a film that I like a lot. I think it's almost a masterpiece, but maybe just not my kind of masterpiece. This is a movie that I wouldn't rewatch. I'm just going to be honest with you. I understand the movie. I love a lot of the visual stuff, but it's not a movie that I'm really dying to go back into and see certain scenes and see certain moments, because that's not what this movie is. This movie is a thematical, psychological study, and if you dig shit like that, this movie might be like one of your favorite things. If that's not your cup of tea, if you're looking for more of a, just, you want plot, you don't really care about all the thematical essence of it and some of the very, kind of low-key visual stuff, this movie, you're probably going to hate it. I'm just going to be honest, but it's a movie that I think is a 5 out of 5. It's absolutely amazing. I just probably not going to go back and rewatch it anytime soon. Sicario is one of the more surprising films in the world because it's another film that kind of subverts its own genre, in a sense. Denis went into this film and made a film about this agency going against the cartels, and a lot of the trailers and a lot of the marketing and the visual style of this movie really kind of gets across the idea that this is going to be an action movie. It's going to be a hardcore action movie about Emily Blunt fighting the cartels, Benicio del Toro helping her. It's going to be a crazy, crazy action movie with Denis, who's this awesome, big, epic director. That's really not what this movie is. It's not like that at all. And if you go into the movie with those expectations, you're probably going to come out disappointing. I went in with those expectations, and that's probably why this movie's number 6 and not top 3. This movie I think is amazing, but it's definitely not the movie I was expecting, and maybe that hurt my first viewing of it, but Sicario is very, very different. It's much more of a study on bureaucracies and studies on agencies like the DEA, these different groups that fight the cartels, and the corruption that goes into the warring between the groups like the cartels and groups like the DEA, and it's much more about that and the corruption of man and vengeance and a lot of these ideas and where you have to go, what line you have to cross to fight some of these entities. That's really what this movie's about, and it's another, like, psychological study in that way. About that. Now, the film does have a lot of action sequences. There's that whole scene when they're crossing the border, which is one of the more tense and suspenseful scenes I've ever seen in a movie like this, and that's really what the action in this movie's about. It's more about suspense than it is about action. This isn't Fast and the Furious, right? You're getting more suspense and heart-stopping moments where you're just waiting to see if a character's just gonna die, right? Like, what's gonna happen when shit hits the fan? And those scenes are crafted so amazingly well, and it's what really makes this movie brilliant. And I think the ending and a lot of one of the big twists that happens that I'm not gonna spoil is really kind of insane, and one of the more shocking moments in any of Denis' films. It's really well done. This is just a great movie. I haven't seen the sequel that was not made by Denis. I'm gonna assume that movie was probably more of the action-y movie that the studio was probably expecting. But this movie is incredible, and it's definitely worth the watch. Just understand when you go into it, you're not getting Fast and the Furious fighting the cartel. It's not what you're getting. You're getting something very, very different. But you could be very much rewarded for the experience if you go in expecting something different, expecting more of a study film than a big action film. Now we get to the top 5, and I just want to say all 5 of these movies on anybody else's filmography probably ranks number 1 or number 2. They're just incredible movies. Now we're going to start off with Prisoners, which very, very well could be ranked number 1. I see a lot of people ranking this as his best film. This is Denis' best film that's on a smaller scale. This is not a big sci-fi film. It's a simple film about this girl that gets kidnapped and the father wanting to find her and working with the detective played by Jake Gyllenhaal, who is also trying to find her, who's investigating it. It's a very, very simple story at its core that has a lot of strong themes and arguably the best performances of any of Denis' movies, with Jake Gyllenhaal being a star and Hugh Jackman being a massive standout. This is a gut-wrenching, suspenseful thriller of a movie like this, trying to unravel the mystery of who has kidnapped these kids, what happened to these kids, but also unpacking the actual message of the film and the understanding the characters and what the kidnapping means to each character, why Jake Gyllenhaal as the detective is struggling with the fact that he hasn't been able to figure it out where these kids are, with how Hugh Jackman reacts to his daughter being kidnapped, the way that he acts, and trying to understand, if I was a dad, I would have probably taken the same course that he does. It's another movie where Denis is kind of questioning, where's that line? At what point do we cross the line? Where is it? And that's sort of there's another movie that understands that that's kind of like the point of the movie. The ending of this movie is brilliant. It's an ending that a lot of people study. I don't think it's as complex and as, confusing or as twisty as people think. I think the ending is more straightforward than a lot of people give it credit for. I think a lot of the twists and the reveals are really well. This is a movie that I haven't seen in a couple years, but it's still a movie that I tend to think about every now and then. I understand why people absolutely love it. It's very different than the 4 films that are ahead of this. Very, very different. But it's a film that shows that Denis could tell small-scale stories and make epic movies. If you want to use the word epic, maybe you wouldn't use that to describe this film, but this is a film that is epic in the sense that it's amazing. It's an amazing, amazing thriller, and it's made at a much smaller scale than the 4 films ahead of this. And it shows that Denis has the ability to do that, and I hope one day, although it probably won't be for a while because he's making these massive big budget movies, I hope one day he returns to a scale like this and makes something smaller just to show that he could do it. You know, just to say, fuck you, I could do it, and that would be great. So we'll see if that ever happens. Dune Part 1. Wow, I remember when this came out, and I watched it in the movie theater, and then I went home because this is the time during COVID when everything was being put on streaming, like, right away. I watched it 3 times in a row on HBO Max in the span of, like, a day. Yeah, this movie is incredible. As somebody who's read the original Frank Herbert books and somebody who has seen the David Lynch movie, I have been waiting for a proper adaptation of Dune for a very long time. Dune is an incredibly complex and amazing world, a world that is as big and as explosive and as exciting as something like the world of the Lord of the Rings or the world of Star Wars. It's a world that's a lot darker, but also grittier and more complex thematically than either of the worlds that I just described. And it's a universe that is so rich for film content. And finally, Denis Villeneuve took up the reins of Dune, and the first movie he made was Dune Part 1, splitting the first book in half, a decision that at the time I thought, we'll see how that works out, because Part 1s always end up being boring. They always end up being the worst of the two. And although, like, you know, I haven't mentioned Part 2 yet, although, you know, Part 1, yeah, I do think it's a little bit worse than Part 2, it is still an incredible movie, arguably the greatest Part 1 of all time. It introduces us to Paul Atreides and the world of Arrakis and the world of Dune. And we understand that this is very much a Game of Thrones-like structure, where you have this universe that's ruled by an emperor and a bunch of great houses. Paul Atreides is a member of one of those houses, House Atreides, and he goes to Arrakis, and there's a bunch of politics at play, a bunch of crazy revelations about power plays and fighting over thrones and fighting over... It's just absolutely insane, and the movie really introduces us to this unique environment that Arrakis actually holds, and how there are smaller stories at play on this planet. It's not just about the grand political scheming. It's about, we're trying to mine spice, you know, we're trying to survive the desert, we're trying to escape a sandworm, and it's just amazing. And then you get to the technical stuff. The film, cinematography-wise, is unbelievable. One of the best visual scenes ever, matched with a masterful score from Hans Zimmer, the only person that could have scored this movie. This film is brilliant, it's amazing, its cliffhanger is amazing, and it sets up an amazing second film that we'll talk about in a little bit. This is probably the most unfortunate Denis film, because it's a movie that bombed at the box office for some reason. And it's also a movie that I believe was setting up to have a sequel to it, a sequel that we are never going to see made. So because of those reasons, it's very, very sad. But Blade Runner 2049 is a forgotten, but for me, but Blade Runner 2049 is a forgotten by the masses, but for me, an unforgettable masterpiece. Of course, it is a sequel to the classic Ridley Scott movie starring Harrison Ford that came out almost 40, 50 years ago at this point. That movie is a classic. Anybody that's seen it loves it. This movie stands alone, though. It stands on its own as its own thing that both continues the story, but tells a new story with new characters in this same world that has kind of adapted and evolved since the last time we saw it, and it's very much a Denis film. It's not a Ridley Scott film, and that's what makes it amazing, because I think a lot of the temptation with making a film like that would have been to make a direct sequel that really echoed the first film and tried to recapture visuals and tones of that first film. This film doesn't try to do that. This is very much Denis' Blade Runner, and it is phenomenal. This film is like Dune Part 1 on steroids when it comes to introducing us to a new world, to this world that's very different from us, this cyberpunky city that Ryan Reynolds' character, who is a Blade Runner, lives in. This idea of these, like, AI creatures and how they're produced and how capitalism kind of affects that, with Jared Leto, who I think this is arguably Jared Leto's best character he's ever played, and he will never get that credit for it, but he plays this creepy sort of billionaire that's designing these, you know, AI robots, or whatever they're called in the Blade Runner universe. I think there's so much world building and cool stuff in this movie that definitely goes underappreciated, but it is just stunning. And obviously the cinematography in this movie is chef's kiss. It is the best of his entire filmography. It is unbelievable in both how the colors are used, the scale of the shots, the visual effects, the practical effects. It's brilliant. When the film eventually goes out to like that nuclear wasteland that's much like a desert, it is beautiful. Absolutely unbelievable to look at. The story that's told here, although very simple on its surface level, it's essentially about Ryan Reynolds, who everybody thinks, you know, when they see Ryan Reynolds, you think, I'm him. That's me. I'm him, man. I'm him. And in this movie, Ryan Reynolds' character is legitimately like, I'm him. Like, it's me. I am that guy. I am that motherfucker. And it's the evolution of trying to understand what that actually means and if that's actually true. And that's where the movie goes. It tells a very basic story that intertwines the story of the last movie and kind of evolves it. And we get to sort of a middle conclusion. I guess you could sort of say the end of this movie could be seen as the end of the story for a lot of the characters from the original Blade Runner for this Blade Runner. I guess you could say that, but it definitely sets up a bigger story that I was assuming was going to be a second movie, aka a third movie to complete the Blade Runner trilogy that of course we'll never see. And it breaks my heart to see. Every time I see Denis talk about this film, it's very regretful. He almost seems like he hates the movie. He has nightmares about it, and I don't get it. You made a masterpiece. Don't feel shame that the studio didn't know how to frickin' market the damn thing. It is unbelievable. Perfect movie. Number 3 on this list. There's 2 movies I like a little bit more. I remember when I went to see Arrival for the first time, I knew nothing about it. I had seen a trailer for it. I was not super familiar with Denis at the time. I was not as in love with his work as I am today. But I remember going in very blind, just seeing one review and hearing that it was amazing. And I said, I'll check it out. I heard it was a big alien movie that kind of subverts the expectation of the genre. Much like Sicario subverts expectations of that genre, this is a big, gigantic sci-fi alien invasion story that is not any of the things that those movies usually are. And I went into it, and I remember walking out of the movie bawling, just depressed and like dumbfounded at how much I loved the movie and how much of an effect it had on me personally. Arrival's in my top 15 movies of all time. I think it's an absolute masterpiece. Now, it's a movie that I think does suffer on rewatches. I've rewatched the movie a billion times now, and every time I rewatch it, I do take less and less away from it, which makes it a little bit of a con, and it makes it fall down my all-time rankings a little bit more. But I always will remember that first viewing and going through this ride for the first time, the mystery of these aliens who are coming down, the mystery of all these characters, their relationships with each other, where they've been, where they're going, all of that is very interesting. The performances of Amy Adams and Jeremy Renner are just unbelievable in this film. And then just, oh my god, the visuals again. This is the movie that made me realize Denis is the best visual director in Hollywood. Some of those shots of the spaceships just coming down, it's unreal, man. This movie is unbelievably shot. It has a great score. I'm not even gonna call it a score because it's Nature by Daylight or whatever the hell that song's called. It's not an original score for this film, but it's a beautiful use of that song for this film. And this film is just incredible, and where the story goes and the twist and how what it actually is trying to say really resonated with me, and it really worked. And in both a shocking way, watching the movie where I was truly stunned by the revelations of the story and the beauty of the characters, but also just as a personal, at a personal level, understanding that story more today and understanding life and time and aging and love, and it just a lot of beautiful themes that really are written so well here. It is a beautiful movie, and I recommend if you have never seen Arrival to go watch it. You will not regret it. It is an excellent masterpiece. And like I said, although it does lose a little bit on rewatches just because I understand the movie so thoroughly now, it's still a movie that I love, and I don't think that love's ever going to go away. But there's one movie I gotta put above it. I got it. Come on. Denis' newest film, Dune Part 2. Are we being serious here? Maybe this is just, a recency bias. Maybe it's just that came out. We're all on Dune fever right now. That's probably what this is. Maybe a year from now, I'll look back at this video and think I was stupid for ranking this here. But am I crazy in saying that this is one of the most massive cinematic achievements that any of us have ever seen? I've seen this movie twice already. I'm going to see it a third time. I'm probably going to see it a fourth, a fifth, a sixth time. The movie is so epic and so unbelievable. I'm still not sure that it's real. I'm waiting for the moment that I wake up and I realize that movie, the movie that I've been dreaming about, is not real. It's fake. Dune Part 2 is going to come out and it's not going to be as good as that. This movie is a revelation of cinema, of filmmaking. It's a movie that revitalized this idea of what filmmaking could be. It's a movie that has accomplished something in a franchise film that I don't think has been accomplished since the days of The Lord of the Rings. And I know everybody's gonna say, what about Avengers Endgame? Avengers Endgame is a good movie. It's nowhere near what this movie is. This movie is on fucking steroids compared to that. This movie captures what cinema is. It captures the brilliant writing, the incredible central and thematical themes and subtext that really work. It captures interesting characters that are fascinating to watch and love, beautiful visuals, beautiful music, everything. It captures stuff that works in small-scale movies where you're just telling a very small, basic story about revenge, essentially, but it really rips it out and stretches it out as a massive, big-budget movie. It balances the best of both worlds, which something like Endgame and Avengers in Marvel, they don't really do. They just do these big, gigantic movies. And then you have a lot of other small movies that just do very, very small movies, and they don't really focus on big picture stuff. This movie does the big movie, it does the small movie, and it does it all so perfectly. Paul Atreides' character is so brilliantly done. The way that earlier in the movie, he's just the same guy he was from Dune Part 1. I just want to help the Fremen. I just want to be Paul. I want to be cool. And then by the end of the movie, he's literally, I don't want to spoil it, but he becomes something completely different, and it's so crazy to see. And Timothée Chalamet deserves an Oscar nomination for it. Javier Bardem is stunning in this film. Zendaya is incredible. The visuals are unbelievable. The last 20 minutes, I saw this movie the first time, and I said in my review that I thought the third act wasn't paced great. I was fucking stupid for saying that. The third act on my second watch through was like the greatest experience ever. It's unbelievable, and the whole sequence with Paul Atreides and the Emperor, and that whole section of the movie is just so perfect, and I want to just rewatch that part 100 times, because it's so well done. The fights, the choreography, Gaeta Prime, the homeworld of the Harkonnens, what a great idea they had for that. That's just brilliantly done, both visually and practically. This movie is perfect. It's utterly perfect. I don't think you could have possibly made a better movie on a franchise. This is a franchise movie, and I don't think you could have made something better than this. This movie is the reason why, even after Denis stops making Dune movies, we are going to get a billion Dune films, we're going to get a billion Dune TV shows, and they're going to make this a gigantic franchise that's probably going to be terrible. Once Denis leaves, it's probably going to be atrocious. So maybe we shouldn't, maybe Denis, maybe you just fucked us. Maybe that's what you just did. Maybe you just fucked up Hollywood. But either way, it's a masterpiece. It's one of the greatest movies of all time. I'm just going to say it. It's one of the greats. This is a movie 10, 15, 20 years from now we're going to be talking about. We just are. More so than any of his other movies at the moment. And it is just, it can't rank anywhere other than number one. We'll check back in a year and we'll see if my opinions change. Because yet again, I saw the movie a week ago. We have Dune fever, guys. That's the video, guys. Let me know what your rankings are down below. Let me know what you think. Make sure to subscribe, like this video. Click the video on your screen right now, and I will see you tomorrow.